surrounded by idiots.
Hey there friends, David Lightbringer here to talk about the best House of the Dragon episode yet. Wow, at least in terms of dialogue and character work. That's right, episode writer Sarah Hess and the rest of the team cooked us up some absolutely first-class TV drama in episode 2. And I thought it would be fun to break down exactly how they did it. The key was capitalizing on all the history that they built up in season 1 to show us the shifting perspectives of the main characters over time, and in real time. I feel like we got to find out who a few of these people really are, as it was an episode with plenty of mask-off moments and even a couple of here's what I really think and have been holding in for 20 years moments. And a couple of the characters were able to successfully pierce the veil of their own childish illusions and delusions. Other characters betray the fact that they haven't done this and are still walking around with heads full of bullshit. To me, this episode was about the stories or myths that we all tell ourselves about what we're doing and why, and about what happens when those narratives get smashed apart by deeper truth or by the reality of other people's actions not lining up with their words. Quite often, our internal narrative and story depends on those key people in our lives that are like pillars, and if one of them is exposed in some way to be something other than what we thought, then yeah, that pillar crumbles and the world seems to shift. So two somewhat parallel conversations were at the heart of this episode. Rhaenyra's conversation with and confrontation of Daemon, and Sir Otto Hightower's confrontation of King Aegon, his grandson, and Sir Criston Cole, the Steel Fist, with rocks for brains. We're going to focus primarily on the breakdown of the relationship between Daemon and Rhaenyra, which is both a romantic and political relationship, and then we'll compare that a bit to the breakdown of the working relationship between Otto and Aegon. Both of these collapses resulted in major losses for either side. Aegon just fired his best and most experienced advisor by far, and while Rhaenyra didn't lose Daemon entirely as an ally, he's now following his own path and doing his full-on rogue prince thing. So maybe he'll take Harrenhal for Rhaenyra and maybe he'll commit some more war crimes in her name while doing so, or maybe he'll just off and do his own thing. We don't know. He could be gone for a week or forever, as Rhaenyra says. Now, I could have and almost did call this video Daemon and Rhaenyra a love story, because the breakdown of their romance is kind of echoed in the breakdown of the illusions that many of the characters have been romanticizing. That personal myth about who they are and why they do what they do. I also could have called the video Chaos Lords, because King Aegon and Prince Daemon are so similar in the way that they are driven by the sort of frantic, reckless impatience. That's right, everyone compares Aemond One-Eye to Daemon, but it's actually Aegon and Daemon who are similar in that their constant need for dramatic action is a direct result of the fact that they both simply lack the patience to chill the f*** out for a goddamn minute and figure out what's going on, to take the time to consider multiple perspectives, or to simply let their initial flood of emotional reaction pass before making a decision. But in the end, we decided to call this video I'm Surrounded by Idiots, both because I'm a child of the 90s,
I'm surrounded by idiots.
and because I wanted to center the smart people in the room, Rhaenyra and Otto. And I wanted to talk about the consequences of their having seen to the heart of the matter with Daemon and Aegon. Unlike Otto, Rhaenyra is the one in power, so her newly clarified vision actually gives Team Black a chance to, get their shit together, which they badly need to do. While Team Green, on the other hand, is now squarely in the danger zone, on the highway to the danger zone, with a couple of angry, vengeful idiots in charge in Aegon and Criston. But hey, at least we know that Daemon exists, right? And will make a difference in the weeks to come, as Otto says. Yeah, he exists, and he's important. Hashtag Tessarion, the Blue Queen. That's his dragon, by the way, the Cobalt Dragon Tessarion, whom I assume we'll see eventually. Yes, but on top of that, even the foolish characters in the story think they're surrounded by idiots. They just haven't, looked in the mirror.
Ill-considered, trifling.
All right, so yes, it's fun, kind of, to call people idiots, but we could certainly do better and be more specific when talking about Aegon, Criston, and Daemon. Their problem is that they're immature. That's only slightly less of a loaded word than idiot, and similarly easy to throw around. So let's define just what we mean here. I found a great definition of maturity by Ann Landers, actually famous advice columnist, who said that maturity is displayed in patience, perseverance, decision-making, dependability, self-control, and humility. So now think about Aegon and Daemon in particular as I read this list again, because this is basically a list of all the things that they struggle with or do not have. Patience, perseverance, good decision-making, dependability, self-control, and humility. So yeah, you see what I mean, right? You could give Daemon a little bit of credit for perseverance, waging the war in the Stepstones or whatever, but even there, he was the most impatient person at the War Council, right? So these character issues relating to immaturity are many of the things that Rhaenyra specifically brought up in her conversation with Daemon. She talks about not being able to trust him or truly rely on him because he isn't dependable and doesn't make good decisions. Or you might say that he doesn't collaborate with others to make decisions, preferring to make hasty ones on his own that he knows damn well other people might have an issue with. Other people also might have a good idea, which means they would get the credit and not him. So, yeah. But really, this is an impatience with complexity and with being challenged. For example, Daemon still could have patched it up with Rhaenyra simply by sticking around and coming back to apologize the next day and saying something like, "I'm sorry, Your Grace, I have erred. Give me a chance to prove myself loyal," or whatever. Instead, he did the Dragon Lord equivalent of peeling out in his Trans Am. In fact, a dragon is even better than a souped-up sports car for storming off in a huff and speeding around by yourself late at night. Yeah, you don't have the car stereo, but your dragon can incinerate your enemies, and there's no cops in the skies of Westeros. As for self-control or humility, well, it doesn't take an expert to conclude that Daemon has little of either, and Aegon even less. Aegon's lack of impulse control is very obviously the number one issue with his young reign, and it's the thing everyone around him is constantly talking about and trying to negotiate with. This impulsivity, or you might say the need to resolve any sort of confusion or tension with dramatic, decisive action.
I wish to spill blood, not ink. We must act. Sir Criston Cole has acted.
Then leads to the arrogance and lack of humility, because people like this need to constantly judge everyone around them who questions their actions as a way of dismissing their concerns.
He was a fool. You sought greatness but shrank from spilling blood to achieve it, and I see you will suffer the same fate.
You struck down a child.
Daemon and Aegon justify their rash actions by labeling everyone else as weak, right? We saw Daemon call both Viserys and Rhaenyra weak directly.
Your father
Who
was a
needed
coward
you?
who knew I was the stronger son, that I was the leader of men, and he was afraid to be seen in my shadow.
Is that what you understand of your own brother?
And we saw Aegon praise Criston's foolish actions as being more useful than 100 old men. There's a saying that fools mistake patience for weakness, and that's just what we're talking about.
At least I did something. I have not answered injury to the crown with, what, wailing? Currying favor with the fishwives. I will not be thought weak.
Foolishness and idiocy are nearly the same thing, so there's your video title. And as you can see, all of these qualities of immaturity basically go together and work together. Now, here's the thing. We are all at one time immature, right? We start off that way, not knowing our ass from a dragon's cave in the ground. Gaining maturity is a process that you're supposed to go through as you grow up, and as life serves you up lessons to learn. One of the hallmarks of immature people is that they, storm out of the room, so to speak, instead of sticking around to be accountable and learn those life lessons. So these people don't tend to learn from their mistakes, and indeed, Daemon has very quickly made all the same mistakes with Rhaenyra that he made with his brother Viserys. Criston Cole is also sort of repeating the same mistakes over and over again. He seems to have just gone ahead and given up on trying to break that cycle, in fact. And we've seen already this season that when confronted with his mistakes, King Aegon specifically rejected the chance to bear Otto's admonishment and learn something from his perspective. Quite to the contrary, it seemed like Aegon needed to dismiss what Otto was saying as quickly as possible. And in fact, it's easy to see that Aegon, Daemon, and Criston are all quickly enraged by any sort of hesitation or pushback. They've been dealing with their own internal fears and doubts by smashing and smothering them for years, and they now externalize that tension by smashing and smothering anyone else's concerns or opinions. These guys can't afford to slow down for even half a second in these crucial moments, because then they might be forced to confront the cognitive dissonance that has built up from having to judge everyone else who disagrees with them all of their lives. So for a counter example, take young Aemond of Melniboné. I mean, a clockwork Aemond. Well, you know, this guy. This is a man who knows how to slow down, drink some warm milk of the poppy in a Westerosi opium den, curl up in the fetal position, and confess his regrets to a sex worker who might be twice his age. That's pretty much the closest thing to therapy that you get in King's Landing, I think, and it's a lot more mothering than either Aemond or Aegon got from their own mother in this episode, who herself was desperate to confess her sin to her father, but was denied, and that actually happened in the scene right before Alicent was unable to comfort or hug her son Aegon when he was obviously in the grips of intense grief. So these are generational cycles of dysfunction here, which we'll come back to. And look, I'm not necessarily even saying be more like Aemond, and I do not wish to be associated or seen to endorse any war crimes that he may or may not commit in the future. I'm just saying that, you know, pausing and reflecting is good. Low mood lighting is good. Admitting and regretting that you lost your temper is good. All these things, you know, they really just let some of that brain tension out. Of course, then you have Lord Larry Strong, who may have slowed down a bit too much when he was in some kind of dark place, to the point where he took up residency there. He does live in Harrenhal after all, but that's a story for another day. Something is uniquely broken inside that guy. I compared Lord Larry's murder of his family, which he seems to have done to prove something to himself, to the Sith-driven need of Kylo Ren to kill his father, which was similarly an attempt to prove to himself that he had killed off the last of his empathy, something both characters and all Sith consider to be a weakness. So there's your new Larys theory. He's not a green seer. He's a Sith. Sith Lord Larys. It all makes sense now, doesn't it? Just like the entire story of the Star Wars prequels snaps into place when you realize that Jar Jar is a secret Sith. Look it up. It's just like that. I mean, it's basically the same theory. Another contrast to Daemon and Aegon and Criston can be found in Lord Corlys Velaryon, our resident example of positive masculinity. Oh, don't! Well, okay, so he's not perfect, and he also does sometimes think that he knows the wisest course of action when others don't see it, that he's surrounded by idiots, if you will, such as with the whole Stepstones triarchy situation in Season 1. Corlys did eventually go his own way and take action without the Crown's permission, but it wasn't without first spending a lot of time and effort to work with the Council and to raise his concerns in an orderly fashion that gave everyone else time to collaborate and really show whether or not they took this issue seriously. It was only after that process failed over an extended period of time and after extended losses that he took the situation into his own hands. And even then, he basically handled it well and responsibly, and afterward and in subsequent years all throughout Viserys' reign, Lord Corlys consistently looked to reconcile with Viserys whenever they had a disagreement. In other words, lots of people at different times have that feeling of being surrounded by idiots who don't see the truth as clearly as them. Hell, I didn't even mention Princess Rhaenys. I mean, she must have that feeling constantly. That was basically her archetype as she was introduced to us, someone who can see that she is clearly surrounded by fools and idiots. Rhaenys herself seems to be a very wise and mature person, however. Someone who accepted the will of the Great Council in 101 and supported her cousin Viserys, even though she knew that she probably would have been the better monarch. And someone who chose not to commit a massive war crime and kinslaying with her dragon when she had the chance, which is a decision that Daemon didn't understand, and also many people in the fandom don't understand, I'm sorry to say. Yeah, you should think twice before you just say that, you know, if you had a dragon, you would have killed a bunch of people in cold blood because they claimed your chair. That's not a great thing. But if you want a longer conversation on that, you can check out my video, The Queen Who Didn't. And for now, the point is just that this sort of forbearance and putting aside her own desires for the greater good is a large part of the reason why she's seen as reliable and dependable by Rhaenyra, even though she is quite independently minded and may disagree with what Rhaenyra thinks or decides at any given time. In other words, you can in fact be of an independent nature, have your own opinions, or even disagree with others, and still be collaborative. However, it takes all of those qualities of maturity that we were talking about: humility, self-control, patience, and so on. So yeah, surrounded by idiots, so we've all felt that before, but how you handle that situation is everything. There's just a huge difference between hanging in and making your case through persuasion and reason, while also genuinely considering other people's perspectives, versus just assuming what everyone else has to say will be dumb, and going off and doing your own thing. The latter is just what Aegon and Criston did.
And what has Sir Criston Cole done?
And it's just what Daemon did with Blood and Cheese, and with cleaning up the city when he was captain of the City Watch, or with pulling that whole stunt at Dragonstone where he claimed to Otto that Mysaria was pregnant and that was why he had stolen a dragon's egg. It was a pretty funny moment when Mysaria and Rhaenyra were talking about that, and Mysaria's all, not everyone found that jest amusing. But the serious point is that stunt on Dragonstone was the moment when Mysaria realized that Daemon would use even those he loved as props to complete his own objectives, instead of protecting them. Rhaenyra herself came to that exact same conclusion earlier in this episode when she accused Daemon of acknowledging her as queen only as a means to complete his own objectives, such as when he took her wish for vengeance against Aemond Targaryen to essentially terrorize the Hightowers in as cruel a way as possible. And just as Mysaria has been abandoned by Daemon and has had promises broken by Daemon, so too, even more so, has Rhaenyra, obviously. So the lesson here is that it's never a good thing when two of your exes get together to compare notes, especially when you're full of self-delusion.
Your father was a coward who knew I was the stronger son, that I was the leader of men, and he was afraid to be seen in my shadow.
Is that what you understand of your own brother?
What really struck me in this episode is the contrast between some of those immature characters and those who are going through the process of maturing right in front of us. A mature person looks back at their younger self and recognizes them almost as a different person because of their more developed perspective. We see that exact thing going on in the conversation between Rhaenyra and Daemon.
But now I have seen that your heart belongs only to you. And when I was a child, I took this as a challenge, but I'm older now. I have challenges enough.
It's literally the I can fix him aspect of Daemon that Nettles put her finger on a couple of live streams ago. So, yeah. But now that Rhaenyra is grown up, she realizes that was a little girl's romantic dream and that she has enough problems to deal with and could actually use a mature partner, one who, again, collaborates with her. And to be fair to Daemon, yes, it probably is tough being the husband of the queen, but we've really seen Daemon make no effort to work in a collaborative fashion with his wife and queen. Rhaenyra came into this whole thing and grew up thinking the world of Daemon, so there's really no doubt that she would listen to his counsel if it wasn't, presented in such a hostile fashion, with his hands either around her neck or threatening to rise there. At the heart of Rhaenyra perceiving the true nature of her relationship with Daemon is her realizing that he doesn't respect her. When I watched this conversation back again, it struck me that there are two halves of the conversation, with a kind of mask-off moment for Daemon being the pivot point in the middle. So at first, Rhaenyra is probing at the idea that Daemon is selfish and serves his own objectives, and he's denying that and saying, hey, I crowned you, I'm raising an army for you, and so on. But that's not what Rhaenyra is talking about. That's grudging compliance, not true respect, because as she says, Daemon's ultimate desire is to go to war and seek vengeance against Otto and his family, and crowning Rhaenyra and helping her mobilize for war meets those objectives.
I think you used my words as an excuse to take your own revenge. To indulge the darkness you keep sheathed within you like a blade.
Then, as she continues pressing him, the topic of King Viserys comes up, who is actually the unseen member of both of the big conversations that we're talking about in this video.
You never think of your father. His forbearance, his judiciousness, his dignity.
Now, Rhaenyra brings up Viserys by making the inevitable comparison between Daemon's lack of collaboration and teamwork with her father, and now with her. That's when Daemon takes the mask off and says what he really thinks, when he lets loose the silent judgment that he's kept inside all these years. He thinks that Viserys made Rhaenyra heir, not because she was worthy of it.
Do you believe he made you heir because of your great wisdom, because of your virtue?
How dare you?
Or did he merely use you as a tool to put me in my place?
Because he was afraid of the great Daemon Targaryen eclipsing him in glory. And most insultingly, that Viserys specifically made Rhaenyra the heir
because he knew your legacy, unlike mine, would never outshine his own.
How dare you, indeed. Now, certainly it is true that the search for another heir was at first motivated in part by the fact that Daemon is unstable and violent, something Rhaenyra refers to by pointing out that Daemon was not robbed of anything, but rather fumbled the bag himself. But by the time Viserys does make Rhaenyra his heir, he is definitely genuine, or at least I think so, when he tells her that he overlooked her all these years, that she was in fact the best of her mother and and would make an excellent queen. Viserys then put all the effort that didn't go into his Lego city into raising Rhaenyra to be his heir, to the point of ignoring his children with Alicent, it should be noted. Daemon, however, has hung on to that one angle on this event, his tension with his brother and his rivalry with Otto, and has basically rewritten the history of all of this in his mind. Or you might say that he has his own personal fable that he's been telling himself about this thing, which has in turn framed his entire relationship with Rhaenyra. He's essentially serving her cause despite not really respecting her as a worthy queen. And that is the realization Rhaenyra is having and then pressing Daemon on. The final ingredient in the conversation is Daemon's cavalier attitude and incredible lack of accountability. Remembering that taking responsibility is a part of maturity, we watch Daemon say, with a smirk on his face,
I cannot be responsible
for something that he definitely is responsible for, and we can only recognize someone with a severe lack of maturity. Now, I hate to keep bringing up the concept of collaboration, but the first reason that Daemon is responsible is because he went rogue, sending assassins into the Red Keep to kill a rival prince when full-scale war hasn't even broken out yet is absolutely 100% something Daemon needed to consult with Rhaenyra about, as was his hasty plan for he and Rhaenys to fly to King's Landing with Caraxes and Meleys to attack Vhagar, as was his attempt to hold a war council while Rhaenyra was in labor.
Yes, but before that, you sought to lead a council of war while I labored alone in my bedchamber.
So it's not that Daemon is disloyal to Rhaenyra in the sense that he might challenge her claim or betray her to some rival. It's just that he always thinks he knows best, and his supposed motivation for the greatness and glory of House Targaryen, which I somewhat buy, is still a mask for his desire for personal glory, his desire to be treated like the smartest and most powerful guy in the room. So he's fine with Rhaenyra being queen, quote-unquote, as long as she lets him do whatever he wants, and as long as everyone else treats him like a king. And you notice Rhaenys saw right to the heart of that, calling him out for acting like a king when he wasn't. Now, unfortunately, Daemon doesn't see that he undermines Rhaenyra's authority every time he pulls this kind of stuff. And if you put yourself in Rhaenyra's place for a second as the person ultimately in charge of the Team Black cause, you just can't plan and operate a war with your top general constantly looking to make big moves without consulting you every time you turn your back to have a child or mourn the loss of a child. Now, getting back to Daemon's responsibility for Blood and Cheese, he's responsible simply because it was his plan and he set it into motion. He chose the assassins, he hired them, he gave them their orders, and chose the night to do the deed. And let's be clear, he didn't exactly go out and hire some faceless men, now did he? They actually could have afforded a faceless man, to be honest, but that would have taken patience and planning, and Daemon was trying to quickly exploit the fact that Rhaenyra had issued a sort of vague half-command of, I want Aemond Targaryen. Rhaenyra probably assumed the council would then discuss ways to make that happen, which they would then present to her, but Daemon went and did his Rogue Prince thing instead, and his Rogue Prince thing was to hire a couple of people who had never done assassinations before and who had never worked together to pull off what was ultimately a James Bond-level cloak and dagger mission. Or at least it should have been if there were any guards in that damn hallway. So, of course, they botched it. Of course, they decided a toddler was an easier mark than a clockwork Aemond. Perhaps worse than Daemon not taking responsibility for his botched operation was the way he never told Rhaenyra what he had done. Instead, he just sat there in the council meeting and let her go on about the vile calumnies while he just sat there smirking and waiting for her to notice. It's kind of a dick move. It's really a dick move. And he made her look foolish in front of her council members, which is another thing that no leader can tolerate. And it's something that indicates Daemon sees her as weak, simply because he's treating her as if she is. Even worse than that, worst of all, is that Daemon has now turned Rhaenyra into Rhaenyra the Cruel in the eyes of many, as we heard in the streets of King's Landing. Rhaenyra confronts Daemon about all of these things in that conversation, and Daemon accepts responsibility for exactly none of them. And that's why she ends by saying, "You're pathetic." Daemon then storms off instead of hanging around and taking accountability, and it's off on his dragon again to do more war crimes. Back to the Trans Am, and we're definitely stopping by the liquor store. So this more mature perspective of thinking about the public opinion cost of committing monstrous acts is actually something that Daemon is aware of. After all, he stressed that very thing to Rhaenyra in episode 4 of last season while giving her a tour of Flea Bottom. Back then, it was Rhaenyra, watching the little public theater show of the looming succession crisis, who said it didn't matter if some people thought that the throne should go to the male child by default because she was the heir, and that was that. And it was Daemon saying, oh no, it actually does matter very much what the people think. Hashtag consent of the governed. But now Daemon has sort of worked himself into a frenzy by chafing at Rhaenyra's seeming hesitation to the point where he does this pretty foolish thing of arranging blood and cheese. And more generally, Daemon is fooling himself into thinking that he can war crime his way to a Team Black victory.
He was a fool who sought greatness but shrank from spilling blood to achieve it, and I see you will suffer the same fate.
It's very much the same situation on the other side, and in fact, the opinion of the public is an even larger part of the general conversation among Team Green in this episode. Otto, being the astute politician that he is, successfully convinces everyone to make a spectacle of the funeral procession in order to help turn public opinion against Rhaenyra. And hey, look, yeah, it would be nice to use the funeral as a time and place for the Team Green nuclear family to grieve and process trauma. But there isn't time for that. And as some politician once said, never let a good crisis go to waste. Otto may be ambitious and even ruthless at times, but what he isn't is foolish or immature. And in fact, his primary skill may be his instinct for rapidly seeing all sides of a situation. That skill allows Otto to anticipate other people's moves and to adapt to whatever happens more quickly than others. It's a bit snake-like, yes, but politics is a game of shifting realities, and Otto knows how to play it. While Criston and Aegon, they kind of deal with politics as it directly interfaces with them, without really thinking through what dominoes will fall next, and next after that, and next after that. I don't know if you've seen how lining up dominoes works, but yeah, it's all about chain reactions. The Dance of the Dragons is labeled as a civil war, but it's quickly descending into a series of reprisal killings and atrocities. In fact, we haven't even had a single battle yet, and we're already firmly in the grips of revenge killing season, aren't we? What colors go with revenge killing season, by the way? Oh, it's black and green, of course. Now, Otto isn't exactly going through the same on-screen maturing process that Rhaenyra is, as opposed to really just highlighting how immature the other two are in that scene. Otto is, however, having some realizations. For years, his plan has relying on his family to follow the collective Hightower plan, the source of which we've already seen lies even beyond Otto, all the way back down the Rose Road to Old Town itself and the top of the Hightower, where Otto's older brother Hobart has been calling the shots and pushing Otto to put Aegon on the throne since Aegon was born. Unfortunately for Otto, he's realizing in this conversation that he has not successfully transmitted the idea of why family is important to the younger generations. I wonder why that message didn't get through. Oh wait, we have 4 generations of family trauma on display to answer that question. All right, let's start at the end of the chain, where last episode we saw Aegon interrupting his son Jaehaerys' lessons to bring him to the small council meeting, because, you know, he's got to be king one day. Helena poses the simple question, what if he doesn't want to? And Aegon brushes it aside. After all, he didn't want to, and that was brushed aside. And his mother, Alicent, as she told us herself, she's had what Otto wants dominating her mental space for her entire life, to the point where she's not even sure what she would have wanted for herself, had she had the chance. And by the way, this is the repressed ability to desire things, which is now manifesting as her 50 Shades of Green affair with Criston Cole. Did Alicent want to marry Viserys, the much older than her father of her best friend, which came at the cost of that friendship? Probably not, but she was never given a choice, now was she? And I'm guessing that's why the show never gave us that exposition about whether or not she wanted to marry the king, because they're trying to tell us nobody knew that. It didn't matter. She didn't have the space to even have an opinion. Alicent was only ever taught how to rationalize and justify what was happening to her, and to perceive her submission as a kind of virtue. Ooh, there's a deep one. There's a deep one for the repressed religious portion of the crowd. And even Otto himself, he is a second son with no real inheritance, being pushed to do all this by his much more powerful older brother. But what's really key to understand is that Otto is coming from a place of being hungry for power because he didn't have that much comparatively. Whereas 2 generations later, his grandson Aegon was born a prince of the Red Keep and eventually made a king. Aegon just doesn't share the same perspective as Otto, and so Otto's reasoned arguments fall flat. Aegon's main objection isn't even the arguments themselves or the plans themselves, just the fact that Otto is always, considering stuff and weighing options when Aegon just wants to declare war.
Fire from the sky! This is war! I declare war! I declare war!
Otto's motivations are the greatness of his house and his family line, while Aegon is, again, reacting to the things that happened to him based on his emotional needs in that moment.
You wouldn't dare.
I have dared. And I find it stimulating.
And his emotional needs have been neglected all his life by, wait for it, drum roll, his family. It starts with Otto having only ever treated his daughter as a political protege as opposed to a daughter. As we saw on this episode, he has all the time in the world to plot with Alicent, but no time to hear about the secret sin that she desperately and obviously needs to get off her chest. Thus, it's no mystery why Alicent is unable to comfort either Aegon or Helaena, and why Aemond has to seek mothering somewhere else. Let's just not even going to get into that. Of course, this is the cost of using things like the tragic death of a child and a family funeral as a political prop. Otto has been doing this sort of thing to Alicent for years, and now we see her trying to tell Aegon and Helaena in separate scenes that duty requires them to become props. So again, it's really no wonder why Aegon doesn't have the same reverence for family and the glory of House Hightower. His family never really did anything for him besides making him king, which is kind of a horrible thing to do to someone who doesn't want to be king, and someone who is obviously ill-prepared to do the job. On top of that, Aegon's father, King Viserys, neglected him and never trained him to be king, so it's also no wonder why Aegon hasn't internalized the dignity and forbearance of King Viserys the Peaceful. And that relationship dynamic was something that Otto was apparently blind to as it was happening, which, of course, he was blind to the fact that he wasn't doing a good job with his own kids. So all of this really reminds me a lot of the dynamic between Tywin Lannister and his kids. Tywin has the prestige of his house basically crammed all the way up his Casterly Rock, but his damn kids just won't cooperate with his schemes. So frustrating, in large part because he's been such a terrible father and left them with all sorts of massive issues and personality defects that haven't been ironed out. So I have to think that some of the anger that Otto is channeling at Aegon is also anger at himself. He's been setting up these plans for decades, only to now see them being smashed apart as fast as one person can destroy a Lego city with an iron hearth poker rod thing. And his vein-popping frustration is palpable in that scene to such an extent that it could end up winning Rhys Ifans some Hollywood hardware at the next awards show. I don't watch those, but I hope Rhys wins, and I hope he calls up Paddy Considine to get real drunk with the trophy, since he should have won one for his season 1 performance. So yeah, I don't know how cognizant Otto is of his own role in creating the person or monster that is Aegon, but he's certainly recognizing that he has failed. Anyways, thanks for watching, guys. I really appreciate it. Please do click like and leave a comment if you feel moved and if you enjoyed the video. And please do come join me and Girl Nuddles and Grey Waist Tim every Sunday after each episode for the Aftermath live breakdown discussion, where we take lots of questions from the live chat and have lots of live chat polls for everyone to vote in. I'll also have a lore video coming at the end of this week, so look out for that. And yeah, I'll see you on Sunday, and boy, isn't that dragon show good.